Following developments around the controversy over Rwanda Asylum plan, and can now confirm that officials in the United Kingdom are already preparing for the next flight to take asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda, despite a court ruling stopping the first plane from taking off. UK Work and Pension Secretary Therese Coffey says the government was surprised and disappointed with the ruling. The first flight was cancelled minutes before takeoff on Tuesday evening. Late intervention from the European Court of Human Rights led to fresh challenges in the UK courts. The Rwanda Asylum plan announced by the UK government in April intends to take some asylum seekers who cross the channel to the UK on a one-way ticket to Rwanda to claim asylum there instead. The government said the scheme would discourage others from crossing the channel. We have more details in this report.
Deportation flight to Rwanda was stopped an hour and a half before takeoff by judges at the European Court of Human Rights. 7 asylum seekers had already arrived at the military airbase in Wiltshire for the 4,000-mile journey when the plane was grounded. The court in Shrewsbury ruled that one of the men, a 54-year-old Iraqi who crossed the channel by boat, could not be removed until further hearings had taken place, and the 6 others were seeking similar injunctions. The decision overruled judges in London and has caused anger in government.
I think it's a matter for the police.
Earlier, UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the first flight taking asylum seekers to Rwanda will take off and people who are not removed on Tuesday will be on subsequent flights. The Foreign Secretary said it would establish the principle and break people traffickers' business models. She said 7 or 8 people were due to be removed on Tuesday after dozens won legal cases to be taken off, but more legal challenges are set to be heard. Meanwhile, leaders of the Church of England described the plan as an immoral policy. However, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the government will not be deterred or abashed by criticisms of the plan.
Taking people across the channel in patently unseaworthy vessels. We have had to stop it. It's been extremely difficult to find a way of doing it that is humane. It is not reasonable to try to turn boats around at sea in the English Channel. Those waters are very dangerous. We've had to work within the scope of common humanity and compassion. That's the right thing to do. But we have to interrupt the business model of the gangs. And what we see now is our policy, the economic and migration partnership with Rwanda that we have engaged upon, now under a huge amount of attack.
3 more legal challenges from people said to be flown to the East African nation's capital, Kigali, were heard in the court before the flight was set to depart after a last-ditch attempt to block the flight altogether was rejected by the Court of Appeal on Monday.
And public global affairs analyst Sam Fateh joins me from Washington, D.C., United States, via Skype to discuss this. Good to have you join us, Sam Fateh.
My pleasure.
So this is seen as a controversial change to UK's immigration policy. And many have regarded this as the dumping of refugees in Africa for an exchange of about, I think, $120 million pounds rather. Speak to the practicality and humanity of this and why this asylum deal matters.
I don't even consider this a deal. This is morally bankrupt. It is appalling. And I'm not going to call it regrettable. I'm going to say it is just morally wrong. There's nothing that can make this right, whether it's legally or morally. You cannot just make this right. I mean, it's pretty much like indirectly selling people for money. That's what it is about. And what is more disappointing about the whole deal is that it is coming from Rwanda. This is a nation in which, I mean, a lot of Pan-Africans believe that supports the Rwandan president, Paul Kagame, that he should even know better. So it's going to be very disappointing for a lot of people. But again, governance, the self-interest of a country rather than the best interest of people, of human beings, and which is why the world is facing most of its problems today. I mean, you take millions of pounds from a particular country, from a former colonial ruler like Great Britain, and then instead they give you people in return for taking that money from them. There is no justification for it, and there's never going to be a justification for it. And this is why Paul Kagame himself couldn't still justify this in a way that anybody would accept it.
And that's the question I really want to ask you next, because you are right to have noted that even the UK government has raised concerns, I think as of last year, about human rights abuses in Rwanda. So why do you think that Rwanda was chosen?
I mean, they are basically going to look for a country that is going to accept it, and a country that will make it look like, look, they have moral grounds to do it. But like you just indicated, Rwanda has its own human rights issues. It has its own democratic issues. It has its own issues with its politics. I mean, when it comes to freedom of the press and freedom of expression, I have to admit, we will see developments in Rwanda, admittedly, and agreed. But that is not just the only thing. And legally, and looking at international law, how can somebody apply for asylum in your country, but then you send them to a different country? Those that are seeking asylum did not seek asylum in Rwanda. They were seeking asylum in the UK. So you cannot send them to Rwanda. And I'm looking at this from the context of international law. It is illegal. There is nothing that can make it right. So Rwanda, with all its challenges, you want to send asylum seekers to that country. I mean, how many Rwandans are currently living in Rwanda seeking asylum in the United States and in other EU and in EU countries as well? Then you take people from other countries that are seeking refuge from those countries with the same situation and crisis such as Rwanda, and then you take them to a similar country like Rwanda. Then what is the purpose of the of international law protecting asylees and refugees at all? That the UK government, and I just want to quote, and I want to make sure I quote it right, and they are saying that it is designed to disincentivize dangerous and unnecessary journeys, such as small boats crossing, save lives and prevent injuries. That is absolutely not true, because people that are filing for asylum file for asylum based on fear of persecution, fear of being killed, or being wrongfully prosecuted. If those are some of the three cornerstones of an asylum seeker, then there's a difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee, and in fact, what I will describe as an economic immigrant. So who are they sending to Rwanda? And for what? And for what reasons? Why is what we should be asking ourselves. This is just wrong, and nothing can make it right.
And let's also bear in mind that Israel had a similar deal with Rwanda, or a similar arrangement with Rwanda, that was scrapped in 2018 after it emerged that asylum seekers ended in the hands of human traffickers. Are there security guarantees here, especially for the asylum seekers going to Rwanda, where there are also issues of human trafficking?
What security guarantees? There are no security guarantees here. I mean, you go to Rwanda, and perhaps the Rwandan government could be a friend of the government from your native country, and you say something against them. Governments have used tactics and methods to make sure that people are removed from certain countries and sent back to their native country, where they face persecution, where they have been tortured, where they have been wrongfully imprisoned, and where people have been prosecuted falsely. So again, there's no security guarantee. There's no guarantee of safety of human rights for those people. So the United Kingdom here is trying to set a precedent, and I know other countries have done it, such as Australia, but this is what the world should not only frown upon, but ensure that this doesn't happen. I mean, the United States have tried also a similar mechanism, but the courts here, the Supreme Court, for example, ruled it as illegal. And this is what needs to be happening in other countries, that the UK must be stopped from sending people to Rwanda. And in fact, it should go to the extent that those that they have already sent to Rwanda should be brought back to the UK. It will be the right thing and the most responsible thing to do. So you cannot just, what is the difference between human trafficking and this? From a philosophical perspective, I give you the money and I send you back to a country that probably you don't want to go to, and that's not where you took asylum from. That country takes you in exchange for my money. It reminds me of slavery.
So there are litigations around this now. If the UK were to scale through with this and is allowed to take refugees or asylum seekers to Rwanda, where they would then seek asylum there instead, does this have the capacity to upend the principle of asylum on a global scale?
I don't think Rwanda even has the capacity, and I don't even think it has the economic capacity, neither does it have, let's say, with the social welfare programs to cater for refugees and asylum seekers. I mean, oftentimes, refugees are not, they didn't move by choice. They are displaced and they have gone through a lot. And I don't believe they even have the capacity psychologically to help them. You know, it boils down to this point. You can make something legal, but morally it is wrong. It is absolutely wrong. And I think any law that is devoid of morality is an unjust law. So even where on the grounds that this has been made legal by the courts or by an act of parliament or whatsoever method that they may want to use, it is morally wrong. And as a society, when we want to uphold the legality of something, we must make sure that it is also morally right and morally justified.
Thank you so much for talking to us. We'll continue to monitor and see how things play out in the UK. Thank you for talking to us, Fati, Global Affairs Analyst.
My pleasure.